From last week, we had Psalm 85 in our lectionary and also a section from Colossians. I'm going to read just now a little segment from Psalm 85 in keeping with what we just said to the children and to refresh us from last week. Let me hear what God the Lord will speak, for he will speak peace to his people, to his faithful, to those who turn to him in their hearts. Surely his salvation is at hand for those who fear him, that his glory may dwell in our land. Steadfast love and faithfulness will meet. Righteousness and peace will kiss each other. Faithfulness will spring up from the ground, and righteousness will look down from the sky. The Lord will give what is good, and our land will yield its increase. Righteousness will go before him and will make a path for his steps. I'm going to sing a hymn here, hymn number 563, and please remain seated. We cannot own the sunlit sky, number 563. One verse from Colossians from last week. He, Jesus Christ, disarmed the rulers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in the cross. It's such an important message for us today because we forget that. So today we also have from our common lectionary for this week a segment from Luke chapter 12 that I'll touch upon, although I'm going to go back to Psalm and Colossians as well this week. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to them, the crowd, Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Our next hymn is number 564. We are not our own. We can remain seated for this one too. 564. Last week I spoke about Psalm 85 and I gave some background information. The psalm was written at a time when the people were returning from, or had returned from exile, and their land was ruined. It was a real mess, and so they were trying to restore the land and make it able to grow crops and to be revitalized. And the serograph that John Swanson was very influenced by, the serograph, really he focused on Psalm 85, and it's a picture of community, it's a picture of peace, it's a picture of concord, of compassion, of care, of love and generosity, of sharing. It's a dream that most people share and have shared since time immemorial. Here it is again as Eugene Peterson has interpreted those words. God, you smiled on your good earth. You brought good times back to Jacob. You lifted the cloud of guilt from your people. You put their sins far out of sight. You took back your sin-provoked threats. You cooled your hot, righteous anger. Help us again, God of our help. Don't hold a grudge against us forever. You aren't going to keep this up, are you? Scowling and angry year after year. Why not help us make a fresh start, a resurrection life? Then your people will laugh and sing. Show us how much love you have for us, God. Give us the salvation we need. I can't wait to hear what he'll say. God's about to pronounce his people well, the holy people he loves so much. So they'll never again live like fools. See how close the salvation is to those who fear him? Our country is home base for glory. Love and truth meet in the street. Right living and whole living embrace and kiss. Truth sprouts green from the ground. Right living pours down from the skies. Oh yes, God gives goodness and beauty. Our land responds with bounty and blessing. Right living strides out before him and clears a path for his passage. I really love what he does with that song. It's just, he makes it so there. I miss the phrase, justice and peace shall kiss, but right living and whole living will suffice for me. When I look at the painting, it gives me joy, and he wanted that serigraph to give us joy, the steadfast love of God that's shown here. Farmers, families, people working the land, animals, chickens, geese, birds, dogs, horses, donkeys, representations of the fullness of creation, and our part in it, human beings' part in creation. The connection between life and land, water and sunshine, all part of God's salvation. And the artist wanted us to show God speaking peace to his people. And he pictured that phrase, justice and peace shall kiss, as two people running to each other. You'll see that in the upper top left-hand side, the artwork underneath the rainbow. And then he pictures a truth springing forth from the earth. There's a big, beautiful tree right in the bottom center of the foreground, growing upward to take prominent place in the picture. Truth being very prominent. You saw kindness and truth shall meet as people enjoying each other. They're located in the far upper right of the picture. And then John looked at the sky and pictured the sun being a benevolent figure of justice looking down from the heavens. That's John's way of interpreting this art, this poem into art. And by his own admittance, Psalm 85 is an exaggeration. It's an exaggerated landscape with gradation and undulation and the hills and the landscapes and the skyline. It's all pretty fantastic. It's an ideal, isn't it? It's a sort of utopian image. Everyone working together, it's not always that easy. Helping engage in life and abundance, it's not always that way. But you see, it can be much more that way when we're conscious of how we live, how we act, what's most important for us, and how we will live our lives on a daily basis. And I juxtaposed Psalm 85 with last week's reading from Colossians chapter 2. And in verse 8, the Apostle Paul says, "See that you don't be deceived through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and basic principles of this world rather than on Christ." And so what you have here are two pictures, essentially, that speak to one way of viewing life, Psalm 85, and the promise of peace and prosperity, cooperation. And the other idea, which is be careful not to be deceived, so that somehow you get off the track from this other vision, you get into another vision, a more negative one. You see, the rub has always been, since the earliest story of the Bible, that humans desire to be God rather than to be good stewards of what God made. You know, that whole story about the fruit in the Garden of Eden. And the one tree that wasn't supposed to be eaten from was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Not the tree of good and evil, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And why is that? Because they would be like God or think that they were like God. So that was the forbidden fruit. Because once you think that you're God, then you start acting like you are. And so that's part of the rub throughout human history. Those first humans were deceived, and so it continues to be to the present day. Every generation seems to, in its own way, become captive to dangerous teachings, and sometimes until it's too difficult to turn back. And this happens on the micro level with individuals who make bad choices. And we know that happens sometimes, even within the context of our family or wider family. Bad choices. It's not just big things sometimes, but maybe small things that didn't seem to be as onerous as they would become at some point. So Paul's warning gives us pause. He insists that while dangerous teaching infect the community, that God still is in charge and to cleave to God. And he preaches that through the cross of Christ, that God defeated and made a spectacle of the powers that be and disarmed them and exposed the powers for all of us to see. And then Paul enjoins the Colossians and other places, the Ephesians, people that he's writing to in other places, to resist all false teaching. And I think that that's a challenge for us today, because our world is rife with false teaching at this time in history, made more prevalent because of social media and the accessibility all the time of getting images and sounds and messages continually, and many of them wrong and false. If any of us would have predicted 30 or 40 years ago that science and inquiry had become as debased by experts who are as dogmatic as fundamentalists are in religion, who would have predicted that? Where's the inquiry and openness to whatever you can find in science? You're not even seeing that today. The so-called green revolution has been taken over by industrialized and petrochemicalized farming practices. Should we be alarmed by the greenwashing? You bet we should be alarmed. The so-called agricultural green revolution soon will be digitalized. And watch out, farmers, for that. We already have frankenfoods that are being created through genetic manipulation. We have killed our soil by spreading pathogens on them, and this is filtered into our water. And all of that's been told to us as being good because we can produce more food. It's not nutritious food, but we produce a lot more. God gave seeds for everyone to use, but now multinational corporations claim that they own seed patents and that farmers don't have rights to their own seeds and sharing their seeds with their neighbors as they did in every time in human history up to the present moment. That is the green revolution that has unfolded. The results have been stark. You note the picture that I've included in your bulletin, not Psalm 85, but the other one. It's commissioned by my friend Alex some years ago. I've used it to provide a different image of the future, one that we have been moving toward. The present path humanity is on is clearly the one in this picture of violence and plunder, the depiction of decisions that are life-destroying, not life-giving. Psalm 85 has life-giving, and this other one is a horrible vision of non-sustainable systems. Sadly, these systems have continually evolved as a threat to the survival of life, humans, as well as everyone else. The multiple crises and pandemics we face include the health pandemic, a hunger pandemic, a poverty pandemic, a climate emergency, an extinction emergency, an emergency of injustice, exclusion, and inequality, dispossession of land, and this dystopian view is based upon a materialistic worldview rooted in the illusion of separation and superiority, which deny interconnectedness and oneness. The interconnectedness is what we see in Psalm 85. The other picture shows the false assumptions the humans can make, which lead to death and destruction. And I've shown this painting of Alex that he had commissioned to many people over numerous years. And I've used it alongside John Swanson's painting too. And I asked people questions about that. And I asked them who they think the tank is being run by. And I asked them what the outcome is. And I asked them all sorts of questions. And then I asked them, do you see how the tank is being powered? And I'm not sure if you can see it in this rendering here. Maybe you can't. But I think you can. You see how it's being powered? It's being powered by little legs. It's people powered. So you have those people on the top, they're certainly in charge, but you have a lot of compliance happening on the bottom. You see, these tanks can't go anywhere without the power that moves them. And what moves them and keeps them going in the direction that they want them to go are people. People who aren't bad people. They're just people like you and me, who don't understand the necessary role that they play in keeping everything running. We are almost invisible, but without us, the world doesn't run. And if we make bad decisions, the world runs more poorly. So that's why so much emphasis on the Bible is placed on staying awake and not being deceived and keep on watching and not following false teachers. All of that is so important. But why do they keep on saying it? Because we're susceptible. Jesus in today's lesson talks about a rich man, and you know, he starts it all off by saying, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. All kinds. He implies that greed and covetousness are difficult to see and guard against. And he's right. The problem of greed is often coupled with a miscarriage of judgment. He's right about that. That said, at the end of the day, in the parable, God doesn't mete out some divine capital punishment against this rich man in response to his selfishness and his greed and his avarice. No, he just calls him a fool. And that's what the writer of Psalm 85 says. Please, in the future, don't be a fool. There's wisdom in planning your future. But there's wisdom in also giving to each other and caring for each other and sharing with each other. And that's what the fool has not seen, because it's all about himself. So what to do about this? Well, I think that first of all, we shouldn't be naive. We need to know what's happening, to learn everything we can about what's really going on and how it might impact us and our family and our community and our state and our nation and our world. I think that's important. I think it's also, number two, important to become spiritually engaged. Decide where your true loyalties and your true loves are. And really, really dig down in terms of your own faith and how that feels. How is your devotional life? Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation I find very, very helpful. There are many other places. But I think it's important. I also think that as much as we need spiritual formation and Bible study and so on, I think that we can't be on the sidelines. My organist back in New York said this. I'll never forget it. He said, if you want to be seen, stand up. If you want to be heard, speak up. If you want to be loved, sit down and shut up. And most of us would rather sit down and shut up. But I'm saying, no. That's what the elites and the authorities want us to do. But standing up and speaking up out of a place of goodness, out of a place of concern, of course, but out of goodness, out of integrity, out of truth, not out of selfishness or greed is really important. And we can do that wherever we go. When we see something that's not right, we can speak up about that. And we should not be lazy when it comes to this. We must not take part in universalizing anti-nature and anti-human values being cultivated and rewarded because we were too lazy to do anything or say anything about it. In conclusion, I share these words from Wendell Berry. He's a farmer in Kentucky, and this is what he said. If we apply our minds directly and competently to the needs of the earth, then we will have begun to make fundamental, necessary changes in our minds. We will see that war and oppression and pollution are not separate issues, but are aspects of the same issue. Amid the outcries for the liberation of this group or that, we will know that no person is free except in the freedom of others. And that our only real freedom is to know and faithfully occupy our place, a much humbler place than we have been taught to think in the order of creation.